Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Schwartz Report. This week, I want to talk about the relationship of consciousness with religion, because I see a lot of misinformation. So I thought it would be worthwhile to look at religion from a perspective of a researcher who has been doing non-local consciousness research for over half a century. Non-local consciousness is that aspect of consciousness that existed before you were born and that will continue after you die. It is the non-local aspect of us, what religion calls the soul. And making contact with it is what most people think of as spirit. But it's about non-local consciousness, this aspect which is outside of time and space. Most religions and the discussions about them center on dogmas and beliefs. It creates a lot of pain and difficulty between peoples. But I'd like to look at religion not from its differences, its cultural differences, but from the commonalities and from the perspective of a consciousness experimentalist. So I'm setting aside the dogmas and beliefs. When I look at religion, any religion, as an experimentalist, what I see is a cohort of people consensually holding a worldview. The process of assembling the cohort seems to me very much like Thomas Kuhn's description of the paradigm process. You know, we talk about scientific paradigms, the agreed upon views people have in science. Well, the same thing occurs in religion. The paradigm in religion is defined by scripture and dogma. And the paradigms differ in many ways, but they all have one thing in common. They're all centered on the aspect of consciousness that in science we call non-local. It's now being explicitly researched in near-death studies, therapeutic intention work, remote viewing, reincarnation. In religion, the individual experience of non-local awareness is called spirit. The eternal aspect of the self, religions call the soul. It's a concept amenable to objective verification. We see one aspect, for instance, in near-death studies. Thanks to the research at the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, we also know something about the continuity of consciousness. This extraordinary decades-long project, led by two generations of physicians, Ian Stevenson, and when he retired in 2002, was taken over by Jim Tucker. And it is the most methodical and rigorous manner of research in studying reincarnation that has ever been done. Their data, like that on near-death experiences, makes very compelling, objectively measurable, evidentiary case for the continuity of consciousness. And while I'm on it, I think it is notable that although consciousness is often conceived of in physics terms, some of our most important insights have come from medicine, NDEs, therapeutic intention, reincarnation. Personally, as a researcher, I think religions should be seen as examples of a kind of empirical science. I use the term enduring religions to distinguish from transitory cults. And all the enduring faiths over generations and millennia developed a kind of empirical neurobiology, involving opening to non-local consciousness. I see this process echoed in acupuncture, for instance. This kind of empirical science of observing something over and over, not really from a scientific point of view, but just observing, you do this, you get this. Acupuncture developed over 5,300 years ago, and Ayurvedic medicine developed about 6,000 BCE. There is an innate recognition of the reality of non-local consciousness in all religions, and in these two very, very early forms of medical therapy. A small group of materialist scientists, another small cohort of atheists, and a few other small factions may think otherwise, but the bulk of humanity across time, geography, and culture, within the religious spiritual context, have recognized the reality of non-local consciousness and seen it as foundational. Across all religions and their rituals, although they may differ in the forms, they're all designed to achieve the same end, to train a person to attain and sustain intentioned, focused awareness. The mechanism to do this is grounded in the rituals. That is why the cultures of martial art dojos, Buddhist temples, Christian monasteries are all based on a lifestyle of attaining and sustaining intentioned, focused awareness, even though it's expressed in many different ways. In consciousness research, we confirm the wisdom of that religious anthropology. That's what's interesting. It's becoming clear that scientific research and these empirical sciences, practices in religion are focusing on the same thing in a way. We know from the experimental data that, for instance, meditators routinely do better at non-local tasks than non-meditators, whether the task is remote viewing or expressing therapeutic intention or any other non-local task. Now, why is that? The reason is because meditators can attain and sustain intentioned, focused awareness better than random people who lack this training. And intentioned, focused awareness is how one opens to the non-local. What differs is not the process of the experience, but the assessment we make of the experience through the culture of our worldview. Be it religion or science, we interpret the experience. And in science, we assess non-local consciousness not through faith, but in objectively verifiable ways. We have protocols, and instead of dogmas and beliefs, we have objective measurement and the shared worldview that facts matter. Experiencing non-local consciousness is the fundamental experience of religions as well, to open to a timeless, spaceless domain. That is not really surprising, since a non-local consciousness experience is faith's birth cradle. Regardless of denomination, dogma, or belief, all religions begin with a single individual who experiences a non-local consciousness event. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, whose birth is dated between 578 and 447 BCE, awakens in the hermitage of Hirata Kalama, a teacher of meditation, who shows him how, through meditation, he can attain what he calls the state of non-existence. And he does experience this state of intentioned, focused awareness. There are several versions of Buddha's awakening. I'm going to use the description of the scholar monk Thanissaro Bhikkhu, oh, I never can say this right. Bhikkhu, Jeffrey DeGraff actually is his American name, an American Buddhist monk of the Thai forest Kamathana tradition, whose books and videos have had a major impact on the modern understanding of Buddhism. And he writes, I quote, "The Buddha described the awakening experience in one of his discourses. First, there is the knowledge of the regularity of the Dhamma, which in this context means dependent co-arising. Then there is the knowledge of the Nibbana. In other passages, he describes the three stages that led to the insight into dependent co-arising knowledge of his own previous lifetimes, knowledge of its passing away and rebirth of all living beings, and finally, insight into the Four Noble Truths. The first two forms of knowledge were not new with the Buddha. They've been reported by other seers throughout history, although the Buddha's insight into the second knowledge had a special twist. He saw that beings are reborn according to the ethical quality of their thoughts, words, and deeds, and that this quality is essentially a factor of the mind. The quality of one's views and intentions determines the experience result of one's actions. Jesus, at the beginning of the Common Era, at the age of 30, experiences a similar opening of consciousness when he's baptized and he goes into the desert to meditate in the wilderness. In 610 Common Era, then 40, Muhammad experiences a similar revelation in a cave called Hira, where he had gone after he had learned to meditate. The archangel Gabriel appeared to him and told him that he would be a messenger of God. So you see, whether it's the Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad, this all begins because these individuals have a non-local consciousness experience. They become the basis of the religion. If these people are charismatic enough, then people listen to them and they're recognized by others. Revelation is an individual experience, but religion is a group consensus. That is what separates cranks from prophets. An individual must have a personality sufficiently charismatic that people come to listen to him, and everything that he says gets written down. And from those accounts of the teachings arise scriptures, and then the institutions that grow from the study of those scriptures. And they're manned by individuals who commit themselves to maintaining the dogma. But it all begins with one person's non-local consciousness experience or experiences, and that person's experiences of the non-local become the path. And with that foundation, it isn't really surprising that religions seek to give practitioners a measure of focused control over mind and body, holding out the promise that they too may be able to open to the non-local aspect of consciousness. Inevitably, the paths incorporate some model of non-local unity, promising it as the path of the way, or the way. The experience of mind connected to a greater whole is virtually universal amongst long-time meditators who constitute the leadership of the faiths that we call religions. Empirical observation across millennia has vouchsafed the efficacy of rituals to create intentioned, focused awareness. So although the cultures are different, The rituals are different. They all have this same purpose: to create intentioned, focused awareness. In Christianity, the Spirit of the Lord is the creative power of life. It is that incorporeal feeling of connecting with a greater conscious unity. In the New Testament, spirit is described as that aspect of consciousness wherein a direct relationship with God is possible. That's opening to this non-local aspect of consciousness. It is the spiritual aspect that enables continuing conversation with the divine spirit. Totems like rosaries and religious statues and structured prayers help the follower to develop intentioned, focused awareness, which scientific research has shown is the key to opening to non-local consciousness. To give you an example, the Christian saint and Carmelite mystic, Saint Teresa of Avila in the 16th century counseled, and I quote her, "This magnificent refuge is inside you. Enter, shatter the darkness that shrouds the doorway. Be bold, be humble. Put away the incense. Forget the incantations they taught you. Ask no permission from the authorities. Close your eyes. Follow your breath to the still place that leads to the invisible path that leads you home. Follow your breath." That's the end of her quote. It's a statement that a medieval Roman Catholic from the 2nd century BCE or a Buddhist from that same time could have comfortably made, and in fact they did. The Buddhist Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which date to at least the 2nd century BC, illustrate this point. They speak at length about moving into non-local awareness through meditation. Psychologist William Browd, who made a particular study of this, noted the 6th, 7th, and 8th limbs of Ashtanga yoga are dharana, concentration, dhyana, meditation, samadhi, profound absorption, respectfully. Patanjali's source refines this further, Browd explains. The repeated continuation or uninterrupted stream of that one point of focus is called absorption in meditation, dhyana, in Buddhism, and is the 7th of the 8 steps. When these three are practiced together, the composite process is called samayama. Samayama might be translated as constraint, thorough, complete, or perfect restraint, or full control. It might also be translated as communion or mind poise. It conveys a sense of knowing through being or awareness. It is exactly the sort of thing that in other forms of meditation, in other religions, other practices, or no religions, just the practice of meditation allows one to open to this non-local aspect of consciousness. The linkage with the non-local in the creation of sacred space is another manifestation of consciousness threaded throughout the religions across time, geography, and culture. There's always a dedicated place to meet, whether it is a temple, a cathedral, a synagogue, or an Etruscan oak grove. Now, why does this place issue seem to matter so much? Is there something objectively verifiable about sacred space beyond the obvious psychological, emotional importance? Well, in fact, the remote viewing research suggests that there is. It is what we call in science more numinous. Carl Jung described numinosity this way. We should not, quote, we should not be in the least surprised if the empirical manifestations of unconscious contents bear all the marks of something illimitable, something not determined by space-time. This quality is numinous. Noumena are psychic entity. That was Jung's quote. Noumena are psychic entity. Entita. I think the research confirms this. We know, for instance, that if you remote view, it's easier to see Chartres Cathedral than it is a warehouse of the same physical size. Now, why is that? And the answer is because Chartres Cathedral, from the moment that it was conceived, was viewed with intention and a high emotional content, whereas nobody pays any attention to warehouses, just drive by them. So, in both religion and in remote viewing, we discover that the more numinous the target, the easier it is to see. And so you create sacred space by intentioned acts of observation of that space. And that's why all religions have places where you gather, where the service is held. Numinous constructs excite a stronger psychophysical response than mundane objects, and as such, they can be unconsciously discriminated from less numinous objects. So the dynamics of numinosity even extend into the letters of the language of Scripture. I mean, that sounds very strange, but is it possible? Is it really possible that just literally the letters of the languages of religious scriptures are important? The shape of the letters, the order of the letters? It is such a radical idea that I want to present actually 7 experiments that confirm that it is. They were all carried out in different places at different times by different researchers. 5 of them involved a prediction of improved memory. 1 involved improved confidence. 1 involved a greater sense of spirit for real versus fake words, but they all focused on a model of consciousness, a model closely resonant with the idea of numinosity. The first test involved the memorization of a nursery rhyme in Japanese by non-Japanese speakers. 1 was a real nursery rhyme, and 2 were just meaningless words. The participants in the UK and the US were asked which they could remember better. And what the researchers discovered was that predicting the real nursery rhyme was easier to remember than the fake one. A second test was reported by Gary Schwartz, then a Yale professor of psychology, currently director of the Laboratory for Advances in Consciousness and Health at the University of Arizona. Schwartz, no relation to me, used 48 3-letter Hebrew words from the Old Testament, of which 24 were common and 24 were rare words. And from each of these words, he produced a meaningless anagram by scrambling the letters, thus producing a total of 96 words. Participants in his experiments, who didn't know anything at all about Hebrew, were shown these words one by one and asked to guess their meaning by writing down the first English word that came to mind. They were also asked to estimate their confidence in their guess. And he found that on average, that a group of 90 participants were significantly more confident about the guesses when viewing real words than scrambled words. even though they didn't know whether the words were real or false, but they could discern that and felt more confident in the real words than the fake words, even though they didn't understand them. A third test was reported by Alan Pickering, a psychologist specializing in cognitive psychology, who was at that time a lecturer at Hatfield Polytech, now the University of Herefordshire in England. And like Gary Schwartz, Pickering used real and scrambled words. And in this study, they were Persian words, Persian scripts. Participants were shown a word for 10 seconds, then asked to draw it. Independent judges evaluated the reproductions without knowing which words were real or which words were scrambled. And the judges assessed that the real words were reproduced significantly more accurately than the false words. And this finding was later successfully repeated in student projects in both Persian and Arabic words with people who didn't speak Persian or Arabic. A fourth study was carried out by Arden Malberg, an American psychologist at the Integral Psychology Center. Malberg took a slightly different tack. Instead of language, as that term is usually understood, he used a code. In 1836, Samuel Morse invented the telegraph, and in order to make it useful, he created a code assisted by Joseph Henry and Alfred Vail, because that would allow the telegraph, which he had invented, to permit messages to be sent. You couldn't say the words, but what you could send was signals. The code consisted of a sequence of dots, a short signal, dits, and a written form represented by a dot, and das, a long signal represented by a dash. Malberg created a series of real Morse code messages and a similar looking but fake code. And his participants were all people who did not know Morse code, which is a rather specialized skill. And the protocol was a comparison of the ability to learn fake and genuine Morse code. And on average, participants learned the real Morse code significantly more accurately than the new code. A fifth study was carried out by German psychology professor Cuthbert Ertl at the University of Göttingen. Ertl tested the recognition of a form of hiragana, a phonetic form of Japanese writing, and predicted that these characters would be recognized better when they were right side up than when they were upside down, since right side up would correspond to the reality and therefore be more numinous. And what he found was that was exactly what happened. So what you're seeing here is that individual acts of intentioned observation, as practiced in religion, make things more numinous, and they make them more numinous because they add information. This is an information phenomena. And that in religion or in remote viewing, the ability to attain and sustain intention-focused awareness, usually through some meditation technique, although the techniques vary a great deal, gives a person the ability to open to this non-local aspect of consciousness. So what we've got is that religions and science of non-local consciousness are beginning to conclude the same things, and that spiritual experiences are in essence experiences of non-local consciousness. And these two approaches, although so very different, in fact, are moving to contact the same aspect of ourselves. And they are teaching us that we are fundamentally creatures of consciousness who episodically manifest a personality that incarnates, but that the core of us is this non-local aspect, what religion calls the soul, I would call the eternal self, and that there is continuity of consciousness, and that when collectively people focus on the same thing, particularly with a high emotional state, that they imbue it with additional information, which makes it more numinous. And in that way, it becomes easier for people who are focused on that numinous informational structure to experience this non-local consciousness. And so I think what this is trying to tell us is we should be more tolerant of other people's religions. The dogmas, the cultural affect of religions are different for different people. They develop at different times and places. But what they are all doing is essentially the same thing. And so when you meet someone who's a different religion, remember that. Think about that. Because they and you are looking and seeking for the same kind of experience. The experience of the non-local aspect of their consciousness. It would make a much happier and less violent world if we can do that. Thank you.